Good evening. In today's episode, how Nazarbayev's raiders were laundering money and robbing entrepreneur Almas Abdygapparov. Who is waiting in the colony for Bulat Nazarbayev's man, known as Cannibal, and what a criminal authority wants to discuss with Cannibal, what the investigation is hiding, who is influencing the processes directly from the pretrial detention center, and much more in our episode.
На процессы прямиком из следственного изолятора и многое другое в нашем выпуске. Смотрим.
Today, it turns out that the entire Kospaev gang, the same assistant to Bulat Nazarbayev, suffers from dyslexia. Yesterday's brave and family raiders have lost their reading skills for some reason, all at once. The Kospaev's men, who we have been holding in the detention center for the 8th month since the day 500 volumes of the criminal case were delivered to their cells, have managed to read only about 120. This means that the trial will not begin until all members of the gang sign each page of the criminal case, confirming they have read it. Strangely, until recently, the prosecution stubbornly refused to schedule the Kospaev's men. However, to make sure that the lawbreakers and destroyers of others' businesses in the interests of the Nazarbayev family quickly understand the charges against them, the investigative authorities pressed on. The members of Eldos Kospaev's Organized Crime Group, who were extradited from Cyprus last September, managed to do a lot. We have repeatedly detailed how, with the complete connivance of state authorities, Kospaev took shares in businesses, terrorized and intimidated people. They looted enterprises, held wild parties with violence in hotels and saunas, built mansions with private zoos. Nazarbayev's personal bandit, known as Cannibal, captured the entire retail alcohol market under the protection of the Nazarbayev family and lived in luxury. If our judicial system does not weaken and sends Kospaev and his gang to camps for long sentences, they are likely to receive a warm welcome there. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, as there is still much of interest here. Against this backdrop, the case of businessman Almas Abdygapparov stands out, for whose freedom his wife, close associates, and lawyers are fighting desperately. In our studio, Olga Abdygaparova and lawyer Saul Kobzanova introduce you to the twists and absurdity of the accusations and highlight the apparent interest of the investigation. They question the fairness of the 7-year sentence for Almas Abdygapparov. Let's try to figure out who benefits from one of the many victims of the Kospaev gang. In this case, Almas Abdygapparov, remaining in prison for a long time. The businessman's lawyers, who have extensive experience in Kazakhstan's law enforcement, outline the situation with the prolonged case of Kospaev and our entrepreneur. This is important because if the raiders are convicted, there is a chance to review Abdygaparov's case.
И черной полосы для их жертв заметна судьба бизнесмена Алмаса Абдыгапарова, за свободу которого сегодня отчаянно борется супруга предпринимателя, его близкие, соратники и их смелые адвокаты. В нашей студии Ольга Абдыгапарова и адвокат Сауле Кобжанова знакомили вас с перипетиями и откровенной нелепостью обвинений и говорили о явной заинтересованности следствия. Они ставили под сомнение справедливость приговора для Алмаса Абдыгапарова 7 лет заключения, что тут, как говорится, добавить нечего. Попробуем разобраться, кому выгодно, чтобы одна из множества жертв банды Коспаева, в данном случае Алмас Абдыгапаров, еще долго не выходил на свободу. Вот как адвокаты бизнесмена, к слову, все они имеют богатый опыт работы в правоохранительных органах Казахстана, в 2 словах обрисовали ситуацию с явно затянувшимся ознакомлением с делом о преступных похождениях банды Коспаева, в котором есть эпизод с нашим предпринимателем. Это важно, потому что в случае...
We know of legal mechanisms that will allow them to avoid responsibility. They also assume that they will be given a sentence, but by the time they start serving it, half of the sentence might already be served. I assume that the organized crime group is counting on this. Why the law enforcement agencies are taking so long is unfortunately not within our competence to answer. There are probably nuances, we assume so, but at the same time, there are rules that are the same for everyone. A schedule needs to be made, and everyone needs to familiarize themselves with it. We also have our own explanation as to why the Kospaev gang is delaying familiarizing themselves with the case, and it will surprise you. But more on that later.
Ну что ж, у нас тоже есть свое объяснение тому, почему банда Коспаева тянет с
So, if you
ознакомлением
remember,
с делом, и оно
Abdygaparov,
вас
while studying
удивит.
his
Но
case,
об этом немного.
we agreed with the opinion
Итак,
of the
если помните,
entrepreneur's relatives that the
Abdygaparova
investigation
обвинили
in
в
court are,
хищении
roughly
веренных
speaking,
средств в
complicit in
крупном
making the
размере,
case
но
shift
после
towards
долгих
investigating the
изучений
withdrawal
его
of
дела
capital by
мы
members of the Nazarbayev
согласились с
family.
мнением родственников предпринимателя, что следствие и суд, упрятав Абдыгапарова за решетку, грубо говоря, подмахнули некоторым влиятельным людям, которые настойчиво не желают, чтобы дело перешло.
There are many strange things here. It all started when a lady with a bag of cash appeared in Abdygaparov's office, or rather, her representative named Ermatov. They had been working on this deal worth 1.2 billion tenge for a long time. The woman wanted to buy a villa in East Sinta city, which was managed by, and for which Abdygaparov was accountable to the People's Bank.
Работали давно. Женщина захотела приобрести виллу в городке Исинта-Сити, которым управлял и за который, говоря простым языком, грузился перед Народным банком сам Абдыгапаров. Поговаривали, что загадочная
The mysterious buyer, named Valeria Rakhmethanova, a regular associate of mega oligarch Vladimir Kim, who owns the country's major mining giants, made an initial payment of $2 million as a down payment for the villa. Abdygaparov gave half of the amount to the company and the other half to the company's founder, Eldos Kospaev, who always flaunted his red ID as an aide to Bulat Nazarbayev, represented by Eldos Kospaev.
А вторую половину суммы, кому бы вы думали, отдал на тот момент учредителю компании, тому самому людоеду, человеку Булата Назарбаева, сверкавшего всюду красной корочкой.
How an outright bandit became the founder of a promising project to build a town in the style of London slums, where the USA planned to open its diplomatic mission, need not be discussed. In 2016, Almas gave in and let the fox into the henhouse by agreeing to a partnership with a thug dealing in bootleg alcohol, justifying his cowardice by saying that it was impossible to move forward in Kazakhstan without protection. Abdygaparov, as usual, gave half the sum brought by that mysterious lady, 430 million tenge, which, as it turns out, is a favored money laundering scheme.
Коротко говоря, Абдыгапаров, как обычно он это делал со дня появления в учредителях компании Коспаева и его людей, отдал им половину суммы, которую принесла та самая загадочная дама – 430 миллионов тенге. Что, как теперь выясняется, похоже, является излюбленной схемой отмывания неучтенного кэша. И так практически с каждой крупной сделки. Вот что об этом эпизоде говорил сам предприниматель в ходе суда, который проходил онлайн.
Here's what the entrepreneur himself said during the online court session. I received the sum in dollars, half of which I handed over to the company's office, and the other half to Eldos Kospaev. Everyone knew about the transfer of $1 million for Kospaev. This story is for investigators who establish facts. The raiding charge against him was classified as theft. He handed over the sum to the office, and here lies a very important catch. Let's recall the names of his gang members that were announced by the official representative of the Financial Monitoring Agency immediately after the arrest of the Organized Crime Group members, as previously reported by the Economic Investigations Department.
Он передал в офис, и здесь есть одна очень важная загвоздка. Предлагаем вспомнить имена членов его банды, которые были озвучены официальным представителем агентства по финмониторингу сразу после задержания членов ОПГ.
As previously reported by the Department of Economic Investigations of the city of Almaty, the activities of a group of individuals engaged in raider seizures were halted. On July 14, 2022, in connection with one of the episodes of criminal activity, pursuant to Article 128 of the Criminal Procedure Code, the following individuals were detained and placed in the temporary detention facility of the Department of Police of the city of Almaty. Timur Tanashev, born in 1983 Rauan Babayev, born in 1992 Ansar Muratovic Abdygaparov, born in 1990 Dastan Abizhanov, born in 1977.
Abizhanov Dastan Madiyevich, 1977 года рождения.
Today it turns out that this money was taken by that same Dastan Abizhanov, a man associated with Kospaev, who was imposed on Abdygaparov by new partners. He deposited this money into the cash register and used it to make a payment for a villa for himself. By the way, there is also a receipt for this transaction. In general, this situation is so dire that the actual owners of the company remain individuals from the Kospaev gang. These individuals, even while in prison, managed to block all decisions made by the current management team through their lawyers. This plunges the company into a state of perpetual crisis and deprives it of the ability to fulfill its obligations to the project shareholders. This is a prime example of Kospaev-style petty revenge. Until a verdict is reached, there will continue to be all these insinuations from the other side, meaning from the representatives of the Kospaev Organized Crime Group. They are flooding the courts with lawsuits against the directors and on various other matters. I won't go into all the details, but this constant barrage of lawsuits about the legitimacy and other issues is causing a significant delay. The complex remains idle, meaning construction is halted. This completely paralyzes the construction activities, harming people and directly affecting the shareholders who cannot receive their apartments. They have already paid for them and should have been living there, possibly even doing renovations. At the very least, if a court verdict were issued and the property returned to the victims, which includes Almas Abdygapparov and his mother, it would help.
Но, во всяком случае, как минимум, да, если бы состоялся приговор суда, и имущество бы вернулось потерпевшим, каковыми являются как раз-таки Almas Abdygapparov и его мама.
From the initial preliminary hearing, I have stated that this case was initiated, falsified, and fabricated with the aim of seizing the company. This whole case was a method of raiding, and the same goes for the Esentai City project. We hope for a fair judgment and that the guilty parties, specifically the Kospaev Organized Crime Group and its members, will be held accountable for the raiding. A verdict confirming our version would allow us to appeal the previous judgment against Almas Abdygapparov.
И на то, что будет вынесено справедливое решение, и виновные лица будут привлечены за рейдерство к ответственности, а именно ОПГ Коспаева и его члены. И, соответственно, этот приговор, он полностью подтвердит нашу версию. И тогда, по вновь открывшимся обстоятельствам, мы уже будем подавать на отмену ранее состоявшегося приговора в отношении Алмаса Абдыгапарова.
At some point, Abdygaparov, as the sole guarantor of the credit funds, realized that the project's plundering could not continue indefinitely and that he would be held responsible for the failure. Understanding that resources are finite, he made a bold but fatal decision to resist. The consequences were swift. When he refused to participate in such schemes, the Kospaev group manipulated Abdygaparov's nephew, who worked in his uncle's sales department. The nephew crudely wrote a police report alleging theft, which was enough to arrest the businessman, throw him into a detention center, accuse him of all sorts of crimes, and quickly sentence him to 7 years in prison.
И в экстрасрочном порядке навесить на него срок в 7 лет лишения свободы.
The police did not even question why the complainant, regarding the money of the mysterious Rahimzanova, was not Rahimzanova herself, but a disgruntled nephew of the businessman. Today, the nephew, along with the Kospaev group, is in a detention center. How the money, which never became the company's property, magically turned into an object of theft is a mystery. Nazarbayev once said, "Don't do business with relatives. No matter how many good things you do for them, they will think it is not enough." This also applies here. After the trial, the businessman's wife, Olga Abdygaparov, renewed her fight for her husband's freedom with vigor. She commissioned an independent audit to show that the transfer of money to these people could not be considered theft but more like extortion, making Abdygaparov more of a victim. He never denied that part of the money received from Rametsonov was indeed given to the company, as reflected in the audit. What happened to the rest of the money remains a big question, with clear signs of capital flight from the country. It is best to let a specialist address this issue.
И это отражено в экспертизе. А вот что случилось с остальными деньгами, здесь большой вопрос, причем вопрос с явными признаками вывода капиталов из страны. И здесь лучше передать слово специалисту.
26 companies were identified through which money was being siphoned off. These companies were determined by calculating the tax burden coefficient. I selected companies with the highest turnover and calculated their tax burden. For this, I took all the taxes they paid. This information is available through taxpayer search and divided them by the total revenue of the companies. I used only the revenue from construction activities. The tax burden coefficient was below 0 for all 26 companies, except one. In the Almaty region, the tax burden coefficient for the construction industry should be at least 5.6. We filed a report on these 26 companies and contacted the Ministry of Finance. We have repeatedly discussed this issue, indicating that these companies were engaged in money laundering and cash withdrawals.
И разделила, и при этом уже показатель был ниже нуля. Понимаете? По всем 26 компаниям там только у одного, что ли, там единичка. А у нас по коэффициенту налоговой нагрузки по Алматинской области, по строительной отрасли должен составлять не менее 5,6. Здесь 5,6 вообще никак. Поэтому по этим 26 компаниям мы делали заявление, мы обратились в Минфин, мы ходили туда уже не раз, вот с Танашевичем, и говорили о том, что данные компании, они занимались выводом денежных средств и обналичиванием. Это однозначно.
We agree with those who support the entrepreneur that the case against Almas Abdygapparov is a prime example of the situation the president spoke about 2 years ago, urging the immediate cessation of criminal cases based on law enforcement fantasies. The president demanded that each instance of raiding be under the control of the General Prosecutor's Office and that every identified fact of raiding or unjustified pressure from law enforcement agencies be under the General Prosecutor's supervision. Such cases must be brought to a conclusion, and there can be no talk of any corporate solidarity.
Подобные дела требуется доводить до конца. Здесь не может быть и речи о какой-либо корпоративной солидарности.
It seems to us that there are probably no precedents in the country where victims of raiding have so thoroughly and specifically informed the public about the nuances of the case. In this case, there is a certain absurdity. So-called shareholders of the company, who did nothing to develop the project and only engaged in looting, are now blocking the company's operations through their lawyers. It is difficult to explain the position of the prosecutor's office, which ignores facts in favor of Abdygaparov that are already known to the public. It is strange that the authorities allow people behind bars to continue exerting pressure on the company that Abdygaparov created. Currently, AV Construction cannot fulfill its obligations due to ongoing legal proceedings. Representatives of the raiders, while in pretrial detention, issue powers of attorney to lawyers, which are then annulled, but the lawyers continue to use these powers. For example, Ms. Kuznetsova, who defended Bashimbev, received an electronic digital signature, EDS, through the PSC in April 2023 in the name of one of the founders, and using this signature, she issued a power of attorney to another lawyer, Rakhmetsanov. The court does not pay attention to this. We filed petitions in the courts of the first and second instances at the end of 2023, but the courts did not take notice. We made a request to the Ministry of Digital Development, which confirmed that the transfer of the EDS was illegal. Nevertheless, a person in pretrial detention continues to participate in the court, which is absurd. The only person in the company genuinely interested in implementing the project was not the pretrial detainee Timur Tanashev, but Dastan Abizhanov, introduced into the project by Babayev and Eldos Kospaev. The owners of the 70% stake in the project, Timur Tanashev and Dastan Abizhanov, are unknown to the business community.
Суд на это не обращает внимания. Мы когда приняли участие, начали принимать участие в конце 2023 года, были ходатайства специальные на имя судов по первой инстанции, по второй инстанции. Самое интересное, что на вот это суды не обратили внимания. Допустим, мы сделали запрос, вот я лично делал запрос в Министерство цифрового развития, в котором мы указали, вот так как это является ведомство, которое именно занимается этими вопросами по цифровизации. Они нам четкий ответ дали, что на данный момент является незаконной передачей. Как может человек находиться в следственном изоляторе, и закон по этому, и подает исковый, за него расписывается ЭЦП Рахметжанов. и участвовать в суде спокойно. Понимаете, это нонсенс.
Abdygaparov, who developed this project from scratch, organized and elevated it, defended his creation at the Urban Planning Council and attracted almost $300 million to the project. He acted as a guarantor before the bank, which, seemingly unaware of the situation, is exerting enormous pressure on the current management. When sales levels reached 10 billion tenge, it caught the attention of the greedy offspring of the Nazarbayev family, such as Kunduz Nazarbayeva, the daughter of Bulat Nazarbayev, and her husband Bekzat Usanov, who until recently was the head of the Department of Economic Investigations in Almaty. Realizing their time was running out, they appointed Kospaev to take over the project, sell everything possible, and siphon off the money.
Ясно же, что когда уровни продаж достигли показателя в 10 миллиардов тенге, этого не могли не заметить бесталанные, но алчные отпрыски Назарбаевых, как, например, Кундуз Назарбаева, дочь Булата Назарбаева, ее муж Бекзат Усенов до недавнего времени, это начальник департамента экономических расследований Алматы.
At some point, Kospaev became so brazen that he forced Abdygaparov to sell for 500,000 tenge a huge plot of land worth billions, and to fence it off, decorating the fence with his personal monogram. Using the company's resources, Kospaev began building his mansion in the Yasintai City residential complex. This mansion was never part of the project and does not fit into the architectural design of the complex. Nevertheless, the land officially still belongs to him, and he bought it for 500,000 tenge, although one saka of land in that area costs around $50,000.
Особняк Косpaева, который в принципе никогда не был предусмотрен ни проектом, никак он не вписывается своим архитектурным решением в жилой комплекс. Это самозахват, самозастрой, но тем не менее эта земля официально ему принадлежит до сих пор.
И за сколько он ее купил?
По-моему, около 500 тысяч тенге. Хотя одна сотка земли в Ясинтай-Сити стоит около 50 тысяч долларов.
We will fight to the end and are confident that Almas will be acquitted because there is a new audit report and new circumstances. Almas will be acquitted in any case. But what is happening now defies explanation. He has already served half of his sentence, the damage has been compensated, and there is a bailiff's report, yet the court has once again denied Almas's release. Kospaev committed crimes until 2016, engaging in raiding and crimes at the highest state level. Excise taxes on alcohol and other taxes cannot be collected without support from the top. We all know there is a struggle between the old and new Kazakhstan, between the old and new authorities. A concrete solution is needed here, and only the judicial system can provide this solution. We hope that this time everything will be fair.
И, как мы все знаем, ни для кого не секрет, что идет борьба между старым и новым Казахстаном, ну и между старой и новой властью. Но здесь нужно конкретное решение, и это решение может быть только судебная система. Где, я надеюсь, уж в этот раз уже должно быть все по-честному.
We also want everything to be fair in the country. Kospaev's people intentionally hinder the process of restoring justice, obstructing the investigation by using their bribe bloggers and public figures. Their goal is to keep a piece of someone else's business and avoid punishment. They are afraid of going to prison after the court's decision, where Kospaev has long been awaited to be held accountable for his actions.
Здесь ведь не только желание оставить себе кусочек чужого бизнеса. Здесь страх отправиться после решения суда в лагерь, где Косpaева давно и с нетерпением ждут, чтобы, как говорится, по-человечески спросить с людоеда, который с помощью одного некогда всемогущего племянника в КНБ времен Старого Казахстана, простите, по беспределу отправил в зону одного по-настоящему криминального авторитета.
Perhaps, if the General Prosecutor's Office cannot do it, this way it will be possible to decapitate Kospaev's gang, which has sown sorrow and despair.